Cantarella has been out for a couple of days now, and since I've had the chance to properly test her out more extensively, I thought I'd deliver my more fleshed out thoughts on the character, evaluate whether my pre-release pros and cons were accurate or not, and give my opinion on where I currently think she stands in the meta. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So, to begin, I mentioned how Cantarella would end up being Danjin's Saviour, specifically for hyper Danjin teams, where she acts as the team's main damage dealer. This did end up being the case. Havoc percent and skill percent on outro is simply too good for the bloodthirsty cutie patootie. What else can be said? These two are a match made in the Imperator ordained heaven. She certainly makes DPS Danjin feel stronger. It's pretty nice being able to stick the Facility Lady on 5-piece Midnight Veil, and have her offer all that tasty extra Havoc percent to Danjin on top of what she already gives her on outro. The extra personal damage she adds to the team is nice too if you opt to build your Cantarella well, and all in all, the synergy does what I expected it to. Frees up your Havoc Rovers so that you can use them elsewhere, while being a great big boost to Danjin's own numbers. Of course, I know that most Danjin mains prefer to simply play her without any teammates, because you guys love a good challenge, but hey, if you want to play her in a full team, or if you're a more casual main of the character, then yes, the Facility Lady is indeed a splendid character to pick up. I previously mentioned how Cantarella's ability to offer skill percent on outro would mean that she'd be a viable alternative teammate to characters that enjoy that sort of buff. Yeah, this ended up being the case. Jojo is obviously way better for Carlotta, and missing out on the silly Painter's Eye 4 did have me running into some energy issues when running my regular Montelli Lady build without any energy adjustments. So it is true that you want another 1 to 2 ER rolls on your Carlotta in order to comfortably use her with Cantarella. However, outside of the ER related drawbacks, it's as good as you'd expect it to be. She does indeed work with Jinchi as well, seeing as she can offer coordinated attacks which help the Magistrate build up stacks effectively. The main reason as to why you'd use the Facility Lady with Jinjo's Magistrate would be to free up Jojo for Carlotta, or to act as an upgrade over Yuan Wu if you don't have the silly Painter. If you already own Yinlin, then I wouldn't pull Cantarella just to fulfill this role, because she too can free up your Jojo. With that being said, yes, the Facility Lady will be an upgrade over the Spy Lady for Jinchi, because the skill percent is more useful for her than the Liberation percent on outro. While you don't need Cantarella for this, as Yuan Wu exists as a perfectly free-to-play friendly Jinchi option, it's still a really neat way that you can make effective use of your Jellyfish Lady. I mentioned before how she'd be able to heal a pretty good amount, which would make casual gameplay smoother. Yeah, essentially. There's not really much else to add here. The heals are much like Brandt's, in the sense that you're not really supposed to focus on them. Her heals are merely a byproduct of the rotation that you're already gonna do. It's a nice bonus, but if you're able to dodge, then it's not really something that's gonna affect your gameplay anyway. Considering how good she is for Danjin and how she regularly drains her own HP, it is indeed nice quality of life for casual Danjin mains, but otherwise, I wouldn't really focus on this aspect of her too much. I personally don't advise using Cantarella as a third slot teammate in the same vein as Shorekeeper or Verena. Those two characters provide some very powerful universal buffs to the entire team, and were designed with being a third slot in mind. Cantarella fills a similar niche to Yinlin and Jojo, except she's made for Havoc skill units. What's important to note is that a third slot teammate isn't used primarily for the sake of their healing most of the time. No, you generally use them for their strong buffs. Now if this was the case, then you wouldn't use Shorekeeper in teams that feature Brandt, because he heals and shields a lot on his own already. So because Cantarella doesn't provide universal team-wide buffs, and is more designed towards supporting a main DPS if her buff that expires on swap off, I'd stick to using her as a second slot sub DPS, as opposed to trying to force her into being a third slot healer. It'll still work I suppose, but it'll not be the most ideal way to play her. Before, I mentioned how this lovely Facility Lady would feature some decent personal damage. This ended up ringing true. Her damage contributions are much like Jojo's. Solid, nothing groundbreaking that you absolutely have to focus on, but definitely a nice addition to the team's overall performance. It's worth your time to equip some decent echoes onto her, and give her a decent weapon. She can put in some solid work. You're not going to be utterly blown away or anything, and I'd say that her output truly starts to shine once you hand the Facility Lady her signature weapon. However, even on some other options, she'll still contribute a nice bit of additional damage. I think the best way to describe it is noticeable. After all, she is a sub DPS, so naturally her personal damage was going to be decent. Cantarella certainly meets the standards of a good sub DPS in my opinion. It's pretty satisfying to see her enhanced skill do some solid numbers. Her coordinated attacks don't contribute all that much. You're more so going to see the bulk of the output in her enhanced skill blast, but the coordinated attacks are still a nice extra bit of damage sprinkled in there. Previously, I brought up how Cantarella was going to have very free-to-play friendly teams. Yes, this is indeed true. She doesn't only have 5-star synergies. I've already ran over Danjin, who's a 4-star main DPS. She also happens to be one of the strongest 4-star DPSs in the game, so this synergy's no joke. While there's more effective ways to run Danjin, sure, this is still an excellent use for her. So if you want a cheap place to use her, look no further than slotting her with this bloodthirsty cutie patootie. She's been on quite a lot of banners at this stage, and because Crow tends to release new 4-star characters at quite a slow rate, her frequency of banner appearances is only going to continue to be high. Shoot, even on the current banners of Camellya and Cantarella, Danjin's right there. Crow knows that she's good with those two. so it's highly likely that you're going to run into at least a single copy if you do end up pulling for the Jellyfish Lady. Otherwise, Rover is a character that literally everyone has access to. Havoc Rover is a very powerful DPS, and while I'd prefer to use Roshia or Sanhua, that's not to say Cantarella doesn't work well with him, so that's another cheap synergy that you're able to get a whole bunch of kilometerage out of. So if you're somebody that really wants a Facility Lady, but is concerned that you might not have anybody to use her with on hand, that's not a concern whatsoever. In terms of flaws, I did mention that she'd be kind of mid with Camellya. Well, it's basically what you'd expect. Yeah, she works fine with her, but why would you use Cantarella when you could just use Sanhua, Roshi, or Danjin, who's a 4-star on Camellya and Cantarella's banner right now? The only real reason you do this is just for the sake of vigor management, if you have other teams that are in need of units such as Sanhua and Roshia. So if you're wondering whether they'd work well together, especially because Kuro typically pairs rerun units next to new units that they synergize well with, I mean, it works, but I would be hard-pressed to say that they work excellently together. Bottom line is, it'll be fine, but just use Sanhua if you can. Most people skipped Roshia, but when Danjin is right there, and the bodyguard of Jinjo's Magistrate is a completely free unit, yeah, you don't really need the Facility Lady for your Crazy Lady. Don't pull for Cantarella if your only goal is to improve your Camellya. I did mention how it would be a little upsetting that Cantarella wouldn't be able to use other 5-star signature weapons as well as previous rectifiers have been able to. Namely the fact that Stringmaster, while it would still be good on her, would pale in comparison to your signature. Honestly, this isn't that big of a deal, because ultimately, her damage output is still going to be decent on alternative options. And because she's a sub-DPS, it's not like you're going to be prioritizing your signature weapon anyway. You'd rather pull for Stringmaster to suit all of your rectifiers. It's not worth getting Cantarella's more specific weapon choice just because of the improvement over Stringmaster. Yinlin's weapon is still the most valuable rectifier pull, and you're still going to enjoy your Cantarella a lot with alternatives. Granted, the reason that this was even a point of interest in the first place is because typically speaking, signature weapons on rectifier users are only a few percentage better than Stringmaster. The Facility Lady is one of the few instances in which getting your signature is a more substantial increase than usual. Ultimately, you're going to be prioritizing pulling for signatures on your main DPSs anyway. The only reason you'd worry about not being able to weapon swap would be in Whimpering Wastes, where weapon swapping isn't an option, but Cantarella's best teams aren't really suited for that game mode anyway, so that's hardly an issue that you're going to be running into. I personally use Phoebe's weapon on her, and even though she has literally zero use for the Spectral Frazzle aspect of the passive, I still find her to be completely serviceable on it. I did mention how she'd end up being somewhat of an ER black hole. Yup. That absolutely rings true. You see, I typically recommend about 145% ER for her, which some folks found to be a bit too high, because certain teams didn't need that much ER in order for her to use her ultimate every rotation consistently. However, what's important to note is that this is because certain teams are just better for her energy generation. 145% is what you want across the board if you want her to ult consistently in every possible team that she's able to play in. For example, Carlotta teams are going to be rougher for her energy economy than Danjin teams. Her energy issues are genuinely just that vile, and you absolutely want to build around that fact. Typically, a sub-DPS can easily get away with running a mere 120% ER, which only asks for about 2 ER rolls on your echoes. That's not demanding at all, but Cantarella wants at least 4 to 5 ER rolls on her echoes, or to use at least 1 ER 3 cost main stat piece, in order for her rotation to be smooth across all of her teams. Considering how she gains 3 Forte stacks from casting her ult, it's a really important aspect of her kit that you can't really ignore, so you have to take it carefully into account. This isn't an absolute deal breaker or anything. It's nowhere near as egregious as Brent's case, and solving this issue isn't locked behind any sort of limited 5-star weapon. That already makes her case a lot better, but it is still a bit of clunk that you might experience when playing her. With that being said, I would like to add that I do really enjoy Cantarella's kit feel. Clunky is not a word that I would personally use to describe her, but with that being said, her energy generation can be a bit janky, not to mention how getting enough Concerto energy to cast outro during your first rotation can be a bit awkward, because of what her intro skill does for her in regards to echo skills. She gets 6 energy every time a teammate casts an echo skill. So where's the jank? Well, you start with your support and cast their echo before swapping, so Cantarella misses out on that initial bit of Concerto energy. Once again, not a deal breaker by any means, simply do a few more basic attacks after she's done a rotation, and maybe throw an extra skill in there to proc her outro skill, but it's still something you may notice while playing her, though once you nail down her gameplay style, you'll get pretty used to the gameplay feel. I also mentioned how it's a little odd to pull for a character based on their future potential, because Kuro games typically rerun supports with the new DPSs that they're going to be best in slot with. Camellya is currently the best Havoc DPS in the game, but she doesn't really perfectly synergize with Cantarella due to having no need for skill percent buffs, and she also has better options. It's clear that Cantarella has released ahead of time, with her best installed team being locked away to some future 5-star unit, so there's quite literally zero FOMO at hand here if all you care about is meta and effective team building. Nothing about this point of mine has changed since I initially made it. I still believe that, if you're not really in a rush to get it right now, and you're not super crazy about units such as Danjin, you have genuinely no reason to rush ahead and get her this instant. Sure, she's good, she serves a good purpose and can indeed aid in effective vigor management, but I wouldn't say that there's any specific reason to pull her ahead of time if you're not already interested in her current synergies. But honestly, because this utterly eliminates FOMO, I'm gonna call this a W. Good on Kuro for being really smart about their rerun times, they always schedule these things super well. And now for what you've all been waiting for. Where do I currently think that Cantarella stands in the meta? I think she's okay. She's not one of the best limited 5-stars you can pull right now, but that's because characters like these had their value directly tied to the main DPSs that they support. Yes, supporting Carlotta and Jinshi is a huge deal, but she isn't best installed for either of them, with plenty of other effective alternatives being available, not to mention how hypercarry Danjin just isn't her best playstyle, with it being more advisable to use her next to Havoc Rover if you want the best team damage possible. Her value will improve in the future, but there is seriously no rush to pick her up this instant, because Kuro is going to put her back on banners again whenever she gains more meta relevancy. A good unit with some solid use cases, but far from being a must-have. Unless she's your favorite waifu of all time, you can hold on to your astrites for now. With that being said, I do think that Kuro did cook with this character. The design is lovely, the animations are splendid, and generally, outside of some energy generation issues, I find her gameplay to be very satisfying and pleasant to watch. I can completely understand why somebody would want her. I'm happy to have her myself. I'll certainly pick up whoever ends up being our future main DPS slot in the future. For now, I'm gonna continue building up my Danjin and messing around with Hyper Danjin teams, since that's been fun to do so far. How about yourself? Are you impressed with Cantarella, or is she an underwhelming release to you? Let me know down below, I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, I have a ZZZ second channel. Head on over and subscribe if you're interested in some fun, silly ZZZ content. I'd also like to mention that I stream on Twitch. I stream once a week every week on Saturdays, starting from 3 PM UK time. Come along so we can play Wuthering Waves, Z, and do some other fun stuff together. Hopefully this video was able to tell you my more developed opinions on Cantarella now that we've had her out for a while. This has been Juice, signing out, and remember that a day keeps the Phacelia poison away.